Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at some really cool ideas about mastering your mind and your life. And all of this is from this text that we found called artofocus.md. It's kind of like someone's personal notes,
Yeah.
packed with all these insights on focus.
Yeah, and it's not just about, quick tips or life hacks or anything. It's like a deep dive into the philosophy of how to make real lasting change.
Okay, so it's not like just another productivity hack.
Exactly. It's like going beyond, just the how-to stuff and really understanding the why behind it all. Like think about it. How many times have you tried out some new productivity trick and it just didn't really stick?
Oh, tons of times. I'll get all excited about a new system or something, but then it kind of wears off after a while.
Yeah, and that might be because you were focused on the tactic itself and not the underlying principle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, makes sense.
So this text, it really pushes us to think deeper and understand like the core concepts that drive real focus.
hmm
And one of the key ideas that it explores is this thing called entropy. Entropy. Okay, I gotta admit that word sounds a little intimidating.
Yeah.
Is this like physics class all over again?
No, no, no. Don't worry. It's not that complicated. Think of entropy as like this universal tendency towards disorder. Like, when you leave your room for a few days and it just naturally gets all messy,
Yeah.
that's entropy at work.
Okay, so it's not just about my messy desk then.
Well, maybe a little bit. But the more important thing is this principle also applies to our minds as well. So just like how a garden needs tending to prevent weeds from taking over our minds, also need effort and attention to stay sharp and focused.
So we have to actively fight against this kind of mental clutter.
Exactly. The text is saying we need to be aware of where this mental entropy is creeping into our lives.
So where should we be looking for it than this mental entropy?
It could be anywhere, really.
Mm-hmm.
Think about your daily routine. Like, has it become stagnant or unproductive? Or maybe it's your career. Are you feeling stuck in a rut? Even our thinking patterns can fall prey to this entropy, leading to like mental clutter and just a lack of clarity.
That's actually resonating with me because I've been feeling a little scattered lately, like my energy is being pulled in too many different directions. Could that be entropy?
It could be. Now,
Hmm.
here's where things get really interesting. The text uses this really powerful analogy to explain how our minds actually work.
Uh,
So consciousness is like water, and the content of our minds is like the cup, the shape of that cup, like the routines and systems that we create that actually determines how that water
oh,
flows.
I like that analogy. So our habits and our routines are actually shaping how our minds operate.
Precisely. So like your morning routine, for example, that becomes a cup that can either energize and focus you for the day or leave you feeling drained and scattered.
That makes so much sense. It's not just about having a routine, it's about having a routine that actually works for you.
Exactly. Now, even with the best routines in place, we can still get caught up in the details of daily life and lose sight of the bigger picture. That's where this idea of zooming out comes in.
What does that look like in practice, zooming out?
Think back to that water analogy. Imagine pouring that water into a larger container. Your perspective expands and you see new possibilities. So zooming out is about taking a step back, gaining some perspective and seeing the forest for the trees, as they say.
I can definitely relate to that. I remember one time I was working on this huge project and I got so bogged down in all the details that I completely lost motivation. I was just staring at these spreadsheets for hours and I just felt totally overwhelmed.
We've all been there.
What?
What did you do to break out of that rut?
Well, I finally just like stepped away from the computer, went for a walk, and just looked up at the sky. Sounds kind of cheesy, but it helped me zoom out and remember why I was even doing this project in the first place. And I came back with fresh eyes.
That's a perfect example of zooming out in action. Sometimes we just need to detach from the immediate details to regain clarity and motivation. The text also emphasizes the importance of learning through experience, both our own and by observing others.
And so it's not about just blindly copying what someone else did to be successful, right?
Exactly. It's about understanding the principles behind their actions, the underlying strategies and the mindset that actually drives their success. The text calls this intelligent imitation.
Hmm.
You know, let's say you admire someone like, I don't know, insert the name of a well-known figure. It's not about trying to become them. It's about analyzing how they approach challenges,
Yeah.
their decision-making process, their overall philosophy.
It's like reverse engineering their success, figuring out the why behind the what. That's really insightful.
And this ties into another crucial concept in the text, radical open-mindedness. It argues that a lot of times we inherit beliefs and assumptions from society that actually limit our potential because they close us off to new possibilities.
So we're holding on to these limiting beliefs without even realizing it.
Yeah, that's the danger. It prevents us from seeing things with fresh eyes and exploring those unconventional ideas that could lead to breakthroughs. The text challenges us to question even those things that seem sacred or untouchable.
Wow, that's a powerful challenge. So it seems like we've established a foundation here with these ideas. Understanding entropy, the power of perspective, and the need for open-mindedness. Where do we go from here?
So from this foundation, the text introduces this framework of key mindset shifts. And these mindset shifts can really revolutionize your approach to focus and ultimately to life itself.
Okay, so this is where the rubber meets the road, right? Give me some of those mindset shifts.
So one of the most fundamental ones is learning to observe without judgment. It's about hitting that pause button on our immediate reactions and simply seeing things clearly.
So instead of instantly labeling something as good or bad, we just take a moment to just observe it. What's the benefit of that?
Well, by pausing before we judge, we can gather more information and then make a more informed assessment. It's like the difference between reacting impulsively and responding thoughtfully.
That makes a lot of sense. It seems like it creates more space for understanding and less room for just those knee-jerk reactions. Is there another shift that kind of goes hand in hand with that one?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the text then goes on to explore this difference between expectations and reality. And it argues that so much of our suffering comes from clinging to these rigid expectations that don't align with how things actually are.
Oh, I know that one all too well. I can get so fixated on how I think things should be that I totally miss out on appreciating what is.
Exactly. It's like we're constantly fighting against the current instead of learning to flow with it.
Yeah.
The text suggests practicing radical acceptance. Things aren't always going to go exactly as planned, and that's okay.
So instead of getting frustrated when things don't go my way, I should just try to accept the situation and adapt.
Got it. It's about rolling with the punches and embracing that ever-changing nature of life. So now let's talk about knowledge versus understanding. This one's subtle, but incredibly important. It's the difference between accumulating information and truly internalizing it.
So it's not enough to just read a bunch of books or listen to podcasts.
Right? It's about connecting the dots, seeing how different ideas relate to each other, and then actually applying that understanding to real-world situations. You can read every cookbook in the world, but that doesn't mean you can cook a delicious meal, right?
You're telling me I've definitely been guilty of collecting knowledge without actually putting it into practice. What about this idea of ego development? I feel like the ego often gets kind of a bad rap.
It does. But the text makes this clear distinction. It's not about eliminating the ego, which is impossible, but it's about refining it, aligning it with reality.
So it's more about kind of evolving our sense of self than erasing it.
Precisely. It's about becoming more self-aware, understanding our motivations and our biases, and then using that knowledge to make more conscious choices.
It seems like all of these mindset shifts are connected, like pieces of a puzzle that fit together to create a more intentional life.
Now, the test argues that developing this higher level of thinking is essential for tackling the challenges that we inevitably face.
I'm really intrigued by this higher level of thinking concept. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, imagine it like leveling up at a video game. Each new obstacle requires you to develop new skills and strategies to overcome it. The text is suggesting that every challenge we face demands that we elevate our thinking, expand our perspective, approach the problem with a greater degree of awareness.
So it's not just about like practical know-how, it's also about mental flexibility and emotional resilience.
Exactly. It's about seeing the bigger picture and responding to those challenges in a more resourceful and effective way.
Yeah.
What are some of the obstacles you're facing right now, and how could you approach them with this higher level of thinking?
Wow, that's a really great question. I'm going to need to ponder that one for a bit. The text mentions that mastery sets you apart in a world that can't see beyond the surface. That's really inspiring.
It is. And achieving mastery in any area requires this deep level of understanding and this willingness to continuously learn and grow. And sometimes that growth requires us to push beyond our comfort zones, which leads to the concept of tactical stress.
Okay, I'm all ears. What is tactical stress?
So tactical stress is about intentionally putting yourself in those challenging situations, forcing yourself to rise to the occasion.
So it's like embracing discomfort as a catalyst for growth.
Exactly. The text gives some pretty bold examples, like closing a deal before you feel fully ready, or even like booking a flight across the country without knowing how you're going to afford it.
I can see how that would be stressful, but also kind of exhilarating. It's like taking this leap of faith and trusting that you'll figure it out along the way. Have you ever used tactical stress in your own life?
I think I have. A few years ago, I decided to give a presentation at a conference. Even though public speaking absolutely terrified me, I was so nervous leading up to it. But once I got on stage, something just shifted. I found this flow, and it ended up being a great experience.
That's a fantastic example. It sounds like it forced you to confront your fear, and it ultimately led to a breakthrough.
It definitely did. It taught me the power of pushing beyond those self-imposed limits. Now, this last concept might be the most controversial of all. Selfishness is a priority.
Okay, how do we balance prioritizing ourselves with our responsibilities to others?
That's a great question. The text frames it as a path to self-development and genuine contribution. So it's not about being narcissistic. It's about taking ownership of our own growth so that we can offer real value to the world.
So it's about becoming the best version of ourselves, not for our ego, but for the sake of making a meaningful impact.
Exactly. Think about it. If we're constantly seeking validation or approval from others, we'll never truly reach our full potential. What do you think you need to prioritize in your own life to become the best version of yourself?
Wow, that's a really thought-provoking question. It feels like this whole deep dive has been full of them.
It has. We've
That's-
explored so much from entropy and routines to mindset shifts and even tactical stress.
Yeah, it's been a really rich conversation. And through it all, this text artofocus.md, it's presented this really compelling philosophy about focus. Gets way beyond just giving us those surface level productivity tips.
Yeah, I totally agree. Feels like we've almost uncovered this blueprint for building a more focused and intentional life,
Yeah,
and maybe even a more fulfilling one.
absolutely. So if we had to distill it all down to just a few core themes, what would you say stands out to you?
That's tough.
Yeah.
But for me, it starts with this idea of moving beyond just following methods. It's about really understanding those underlying principles that drive real lasting change.
Yeah, and embracing that reality of entropy, that natural tendency towards disorder, while also finding ways to counteract it in our minds and in our lives.
Yes, absolutely. And then there's the power of perspective, that ability to zoom out and see that bigger picture.
And of course, learning through experience, both our own and by observing others with that intelligent imitation lens.
Right? And through it all, cultivating that higher level of thinking.
Mhm.
One that's characterized by open-mindedness, self-awareness, and a commitment to growth.
This whole conversation has got me thinking about the text's idea that life kind of unfolds like a book. It has chapters and phases and challenges and triumphs.
Oh, I was just thinking about that too. It's easy to get so caught up in one particular chapter that we lose sight of the overall narrative.
Exactly. So if your life were a story, what chapter do you feel like you're in right now? And what kind of story do you want to tell?
Ooh, that's a big question. I don't know if I have a complete answer yet, but I feel like I'm definitely in a chapter of exploration right now. Trying to figure out what truly matters to me and how I can make a meaningful impact.
And that's kind of the beauty of it, isn't it? We're not just passive readers of our own stories. We're the authors. We have the power to choose the direction, craft the narrative, and shape the meaning.
And that power comes from focus, doesn't it? From intentionally directing our energy and attention towards what we value most.
It's about aligning our actions with our values, our goals, and our deepest desires.
Well said.
Yeah.
So to all of you listening out there, I hope this deep dive has inspired you to explore these ideas further. To experiment with the concepts that we've discussed and see what resonates with you. Maybe even challenge yourselves to think a little differently.
Because when you master your focus, you master your life.
And who knows what incredible stories you might write.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.